So my son, about 4 years old, walked up to me one day with a very pleased smile on his face and and looked me in the eye and said, "Dad." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I know what I want to be." And of course, be when I grow up. And and I, of course, was fascinated and excited and said, "What?" And he said, "I want to be a maker." I was, I was flabbergasted. Like that. It's like the very sort of definition of a craftsman, right? But not necessarily that he was going to be my kind of craftsman and that sort of thing. But the idea of a maker, the idea of making things, he'd picked that up as a 4 year old. That was something of significant value, and he could see pleasure, joy in it. And I know that those of you who are watching this are primarily of a craftsman like mind, which I really want to hear from me. Isn't necessarily what I'm going to be talking about today. I know you jump on it whenever I'm doing anything like a demonstration, and I really will finish up those things as soon as I can, so you can see how I'm taking the way I start into greater refinement. But I decided today to go ahead and though and turn this around on you a little bit and ask you some questions. Uh, it isn't that I've run out of questions. I do have some more, but they keep dragging me back into these esoteric places. And like last week's, and thank you, both you, Gail and James, for, uh, I'll use the asterisk for correcting me on the question of whether fine art is actually defined. I never said, and don't mean ever to say, that I don't think fine art has a definition. And I apologize even to Elizabeth for saying, for just walking away from her real question. But of course it does. I mean, it's in common use, and I don't, and even more than just a term of the marketplace, as James said. Uh, but something that Gail said sort of uh, put me in mind to talk about some other things. I mean, just the very idea of fine art. Now we're talking about art. These aren't the things I really want to get into either. I'm primarily interested in the craft, and I'm interested in actually sharing with you the thinking that goes with that, the craft, as to whatever extent that I have it, and to whatever extent it actually uh, derives from the Boston School. I'm eager to talk about them. So, but let me just put some questions to you. I don't mean to give them answers, but just I want to do it in the form of a kind of a meditation, if you like, and walk away when this time, because I remember picking up a book. I think it was called The Art Spirit. You've seen that, Robert Henry. And I remember it's about a third of the way through. It was also puffed up. I finally just threw it across the room. I've never finished reading it since. I found that it was actually stifling the thing I needed to do, which was work. And so much of what we talk about is in that category. We talk about art. You need to stay focused on the work, right? And when you're a student, you need to stay focused on the work of becoming a painter, becoming a master of the visual impression, of the master of the visual world, of the successful art and uh, um, what should we say, truthful articulation of what you see in front of you. Is your primary job. Just stay focused. But there is a certain need for the thinking side of things. I think Alfred Steven says it both ways. He says, "I don't want to talk to you if you're not a thinker," and he said, you can't be thinking and painting. You have to. So what is he talking about? Anyway, let's just mention some of these points, okay? And I'll give you a tiny bit of background to each of them. These are just questions, all in the form of questions. So I'll put them up on the screen for you as they come up, and I'll leave it up to my to my producer to do what he wants with them as far as that goes. So the first question, I mean, that always comes up in my own mind when I talk to students, and I see them getting lost in unimportant things, and especially when they come to me showing me work that is really in poor taste or something like that, um, and or if they begin to forget uh, why they're painters, why they even came. I use the expression, I ask the question, what brought you to the dance? And all I mean is try to remember. And sometimes it isn't the simple memory. Like for me, the first thing I remember about painting was the Gilbert Stuart unfinished painting from the Athenaeum collection that I've mentioned to you before. Uh, and so, in some sense, that that need to understand what that this thing, little messes of paint turning into a nose, what that was. There's some need to understand that. And so, I guess I had a bit of an analytical mind already as a kid, but but as time goes by and you're introduced to our world, that isn't the thing that keeps you there. Even if it was what brought you there, it may not be what keeps you there, right? So, but that's a big question. What brought you to the dance, and are you staying with that? I was listening to this conversation from the Mass College of Art student who said he went to the counselor and to see what to do, what classes to take and that sort of thing. And the counselor said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And he said, "I just would like to paint like Vermeer." And she said, "Oh, well, that'll change." Well, it's a sad thing, isn't it? Here the guy knew what brought him to the dance, right? It was the love of something in Vermeer. Instead of saying, "Well, let's think about that," let's see what that is, and help you to focus your efforts to that great love that you have. So, what brought you to the dance? Big question. You need to sit around and meditate on it. Ask yourself that question. The second one that comes up is: are you in painting for what you can get, or for what you can give? Michael Redgrave once said that everybody, all the actors, he said they're all in it for what they can get. Nobody's there to give. And that's a fascinating, fascinating question. So, kind of interesting question for you. For every young student, I wouldn't tell you I had the purest motives. I think some of what drives some people to success is a low self-esteem. You know what I mean? I heard that from I think Larry Bird conversing about himself, and I think I possibly had that. So when I saw Michelangelo and that grandeur and all that sort of stuff, and his name and the great forms and all that sort of thing, you can see that a person might come into the world, you might say, out of need, but you might say illicit in a sense. So it's not going to keep you there forever. And you might even then start to use it for self-aggrandizement and that sort of thing. The next one is painting a calling? And I say what does that even mean? Is painting a calling? What is a calling? You think of a calling as a spiritual concept, right? What does God put you on earth for, right? Well, there are a lot of ways to think about painting, but that's one of the very important ones, especially if you take the next one and what does it mean to be a servant of the arts, right? So are you there because you've decided something and you're very important and you're going to accomplish something, or are you there actually having realized that there's something happening here? And I like to say the mind of God, there's something happening here that's bigger than all of us. And we have been impelled by something to get to it, right? So it's a question. So is it a calling? Is it a calling to you? And do you think about that? Now, one of the reasons I'm going to go to the next question. One of the reasons I talk about the next series of questions, I talk about something like that, though, is because it focuses you. It actually helps you to be sure of yourself, to have clarity as you go forward and not be discouraged. And that comes up in lots and lots of things. Okay. So, well, the next question is just like easy, like, what is art? What is art anyway, right? So we're in painting, we're in this thing called art, right? So what is art? And what makes painting and specifically an art, right? So are you thinking these things through? Now, I know they pass through your mind, you read books and things like that. It's one of those things where you really have to think for yourself. You can read this in books and they'll say this, somebody else will say that. Art historians, art critics, art lovers, and artists. But what is art? What is the thing? And then it goes on from there, to the question of whether it's a luxury or a necessity, right? I could have possibly put this up with the previous questions. I know that when I was young, it was a necessity. I felt like I was going to strangle to death. I was going to die of suffocation if I couldn't get my fingers into clay, if I couldn't sculpt and or paint. And so for me, in that sense, it was a necessity. But the question is, for man, is it a necessity? So we're in a time here. We're sort of in this mode of not socializing much with each other. So this is one of those meditative moments, anyway. But I remember a lot of politicians will tell you when they're trying to raise money for the arts that the arts are a necessity. That it's actually needed. It's good for people. And I don't. It's up to you to think that through. Is it actually that? Or is it simply a luxury so rich people can afford some stuff and have pretty stuff on their walls and life is good? So what do painters say about that over time, and what do you think, what is it to you? And Yeah, and that leads to the question, of course, what's painting for? And so all those things that we come up, the question is it for decoration? Is it for this? Is it for that? What is it for? Well, what does it do? What does it do best? All those sorts of things will come. What are the most important properties of great paintings? Now, these are any student has to be sorting this through, right? You have to be. In fact, it'll really help focus your work if you say to yourself, what are the great properties of great painting, right? Just write them down. I'm not telling you what they are, but you need to take a bunch of paint. You need to go online, right? And the first page of pictures, I don't know what you want to look at. Just start looking at paintings. I wish there was a way to do it more randomly, but just find a page of pictures and pick one that you think is the best one on that page, and then find another page of pictures and pick the best one on that page, and start getting them grouped together. Lots of maybe 20 pictures, and then begin to then keep on doing it and gradually replace the ones in there, and eventually you'll begin to see that certain properties that certain paintings are better than other paintings, and you want to know what their properties are. Why? Well, because you want to know what your basic skill level, what you basically want to be aiming at. I say it like a player. If you want to be a really good player in a sport, apart from just having good connections, which you really got to be good at. And by the way, I don't think you really can do it very well having good connections. So I'm being totally facetious there, but if you have but if you have these qualities, these properties, skills in, it says baseball, skills in batting, which incorporate like seeing the ball and a lot of other things, right? And arm movement and body movement and uh, there's so many, there's so many different pieces to all these things. If you have all the skills that are associated with this thing, well, painting has all these properties, and you're trying to get the skills associated with making yourself a vehicle for those properties. So knowing them and naming them is a big deal, right? So that's a question. Uh, Painting as a medium can do a lot of things, but what must it do, right? If anything, to become actually an art, right? So we know that painting. There's a lot. We all have painting. We have uncles and aunts and stuff like that who left us paintings, and we keep one or two of them, in the house as a reminder of our friendship. But do they reach this level? And so we can have this question about fine art and all those sorts of things. But you wouldn't say, well, there you look at the Sistine ceiling, and then you look at my grandpa's or my uncle's something or other, and there's a slight difference there, right? So, but what does it actually need to do, right, to become an art? So we're back to that question about art. So let's not go any further. That's a variation on that question. And when does it become a fine art, right? And that's what we talked about last week, so I won't go back. What do artists of the past mean when they talk about the elevation of the human soul, mind and spirit, whatever, which most of them do? They actually finally recognize that their job is that. Even when they're painting history paintings, they're talking about that. And some of the histories which you've forgotten, but in that conversation, there's this constant thing that keeps coming back over and over again. And this is about your treatment of your neighbor. So this one makes me think of that story, and this, in fact, Gail made me think of it last week in her response to the fine art one. But there was a study done in it was at that time, I think it was Colorado Women's College, and it's got another name now which I can't remember, and where they simply played music to plants. They played classical music, they played the control group, no music, and they played rock music to plants. And rock music, a lot of it would actually kill and make the plants sick. No music, plants were whatever, and classical music actually made them grow better, made them healthier plants and that sort of thing. So that's a question of whether all the arts do that. And I suggest to you that that's something that really has to be thought through, and whether you know that you have a mission actually in relation to the health of your neighbor. Just a question, right? So then they always get to these questions, right? Especially today in the day of realism. Why is truth important in representational painting? What is truth? What exactly is truth? What do we mean by it? Do you know what that is? So so is it the accuracy? And then is it the detail, the realism? Is the next question? Is the realism, is that the same as truth? And and by the way, for those realists who think that realism is the truth is the realism of the drawing, And what happened to the realism of the color, right? So we're talking about the truth of the color, right? If we're talking about that set of relationships that make this component, do we have all the other ones that make that? So, and so on, right? Questions, just questions, right? And what is seeing? And why is learning to see so important? Do you know what seeing is? Have you resolved that question in your mind? Because that's actually what you're trying to do. You're trying to learn to see. Even Gamble had two different answers to that question, and I'm not handing them to you. I'm here for asking the questions today, right? My turn, right? So why is seeing? What is seeing? Why is learning to see so important? You need to know, right? If you follow the masters, again, you're talking about, there's so much good stuff out there. I think I'll do the next video just showing you the aphorisms of all these great names, right? Millet, Ang, Rembrandt, quotes from Rembrandt, Boston School guys, lots and lots and lots of different painters have spoken. And this conversation tends right around this point all the time. So you'll find it. Learn to see, right? Should we study painters or should we study paintings? Now that's a really kind of intriguing question, isn't it? So you're asking that question, meaning, do you get in there and say, let me put it this way. I asked a student, I asked some students, and I typically do this when we're doing composition. I say, bring in some great paintings. And so they'll bring in Titian. And sorry, I say great paintings, I mean great compositions. And they'll bring in Titian. Well, Titian was a good composer for those days, right? But a number of his paintings are just sheer clunkers compositionally, right? No, I shouldn't say it quite that way, because guys that reach this status almost never do anything that's purely a clunker, right? But it's certainly it doesn't have the same knowledge levels by the time you get to Jerome. So when you're studying painters, you may be studying the color of so and so, or the way he uses the brush of somebody else, and that sort of thing, all that sort of, right? That's studying a painter. Or you might even find out how he lived, and how he prospered, what he did to be successful in his field. But so that's one thing. So there's a studying of painters, right? And so the next question is, do we study paintings? And what's more important? And so all I was trying to do is ask you to separate the idea. What is this that we're doing? So when do you study painters? And when do you study paintings? And when you study paintings, are you actually studying painters? Well, I'm not putting this very well, but my point is to question whether or not it's equally important to study painting as a great art and sort of rather despise who did it, right? In other words, look at paintings. And by the way, do we look at great paintings? Ones that we perceive to be great, not the ones that somebody's told us are great, but the ones we perceive to be really amazing. Do we look at those and keep our eyes focused on those? Or do we look at any old thing, right? Degas said you can learn something from anybody, and that's true. It's also true that you can be badly influenced by anybody. They used to say that teachers, isn't it funny how students pick up the worst habits of their teachers? So anyway, so then you get on past that to how important is the subject in a painting. Boy, that's when you really need to resolve. Gamble said the subject is nothing, and then he painted subject pictures. He was constantly painting subject pictures, right? But he still told us that. What in the heck? What is that? So how important is the subject? And okay, so when we were in art school, we were constantly in this little discussion. It would come up, and it's just funny. I was trying to picture how it worked, but every once in a while, one of these interesting questions would come up, and interesting is in this category. Somebody brought in the question of what is it? That painting doesn't have it. What is it? Oh, that painting's got it. Well, what is it? So have you thought that one through? Is there such a thing as it? Do you know what it is? Even by feeling, do you know what it is? But right? Do you want to? Work that one out. I mean, do you see that these are all meditative points? These really are for me to tell you something. It looks like it is, because I'm now going to lead you to a question: what is beauty? Is it central to the arts or not? But what is beauty? And that goes back a little bit to the question of subject. Subject is there an all-important subject, right? Is this a subject? What makes a painting important? If you went to the museum, that's what it sounds like. Frequently, right? On the other hand, is beauty central or not? Because when you talk about our form, in fact, the arts in general, the entire thing is is predicated on the idea of aesthetics, which rather the study of beauty, right? And what is beauty? Is it prettiness, or what, right? So having thought that through a little bit, meditate on this question about if it's not subject, is beauty if it is primarily in the abstract, if it's primarily in color relations and things like that, why do representational painting? And that gets, of course, to the question of whether or not all painting is inherently decorative if it's well made in terms of those abstractions. Um, Interesting questions, right? Just continuing more questions and more questions. Are you looking for answers from me? I'm asking questions today. All right. Um, what's painting good for? What's its value? Well, that's back to the thing. Do we bring value? Is there a value? Is there a necessity? What gives painting lasting value? Ooh. Well, I suppose if it has value in the first place, whatever that value is, does it have lasting value? So one of the funny questions I asked about subject, for example, is if the subject is that important, like the oath of the tennis court, and yet those times pass. David was involved in politics. He was signing death warrants, as I understand it, for guillotining people. I mean, the guy almost got himself guillotined. But do his paintings have lasting value because of their subject? That's not the question on here, but what gives painting lasting value? So obviously it can't simply be the subject, can it? Now that doesn't mean it can't be the subject. I mean, for example, one of the things that gives Michelangelo's marvelous captive slave. There's a wall full of them. What is that room called? The Academia, or the Academy in Rome, I think, and where you can see all these unfinished works of the dying captives. I believe they're all the same subject. But this particular one has this phenomenal sense of summing up the human condition. Unfinished, bound and powerful, potentially powerful, right? Muscles, and yet bound and immobile, both in the stone and with the ropes. You know, so does that give it lasting value? It rather does, doesn't it? And that's a kind of a fascinating question, because that suggests to you that maybe the subject isn't nothing, but what is the subject? What can the subject be to rise above the oath of the tennis court, which is never going to mean anything to anybody except somebody who wants an illustration for a history of France. So why do some famous painters fade away, never to be seen again? There's stories, interesting, fascinating numbers of stories about guys who were massively famous in their day that nobody knows who they are now, and they've lived past their 100 years, past their 200 years, and it appears that they will never be seen again. Unlike Vermeer, who rose rather from the obscure and rather unknown. He rose because he actually had this thing, and there was enough maintenance of his pictures to create an opportunity for a second look. But why do they not maintain, right, lasting value again? So, and why should we care if our pictures will last? I remember, what was his name? I remember rather being shocked, not surprised really in one sense, but I remember being shocked, actually, disturbed, I guess would be a better word, by Norman Rockwell, saying he just paints for his times, and in a dismissive kind of a way. He just paints for his times. That does sound a lot more like politics, or like something, we are in our times, we are of our times, but why should we care if our picture will last? And there's two parts to that question. Why should we care if it'll last? Will tell us whether or not we'll make it well, right? So many paintings, the abstract expressionists, you hear about these paintings that the janitors have been sweeping up for years and throwing in the trash because as they fall off of their canvases, because their craft skills were so low. But why will we care if paintings last? Well, if by chance you create something of value, there's something of intrinsic value, wouldn't it be nice for other generations to have it in that field of vision? We see so many of these Japanese prints, for example, from so long ago, and so much other Western work. I'm so pleased that it's lasted. I'm so sad whenever some of the mad characters of our times destroy beautiful work. because of something in their mind. I'm not sure exactly I know what, which has this intrinsic beauty to it. This intrinsic beauty that means that brings a sense of value to all of us, to each other. So, but why do we care? Yeah, and yeah, and that again, that comes to this last question of that section. Why should it be highly regarded? Why should painting be highly regarded, and when? Uh, when should painting? What will painting do to deserve that? Right? I mean, we're living in times where there, sort of like you might say, ugliness abounds. People are of their times in that worst way of talking about it, in the worst way beyond what Rockwell was saying, but of their times in the sense that all they care about is the momentary political situation or something like that, like the oath of the tennis court. And yet they're not even bringing craft to it, but they bring a sense of ugly and that sort of thing. Can it be highly regarded at that point? Now, you could say they might have noble ideals. I don't know. But the work itself, in the end, doesn't get associated with noble ideals. It just sits there. And so what is that you're bringing? So, and this gets to the next question, which is painting, if painting is a form of expression, what is meant by expression? And what does it express particularly well, right? Better than other forms. Dance is about movement, right? Music is auditory. It's about rhythms and tone changes that come through your ears. The stuff that's inspired by the sound of birds and other things in the air that we hear all the time, even our own voices talking to each other. So, but if painting is a form of expression, what can painting express? And then what does it express rather well, right? But is it a form of expression? So then we talk about self-expression. And this is a generation of self-expression, well, in the sense that I'm going to say my piece, right? But that's when I'd like to ask whether we ought to associate our self-expression with the idea of what is it doing for our neighbors. And that's a question I didn't put here, but there's so many questions that come out of these questions. So are you doing something, which in a sense rather is sort of my mindset is, are we doing something of lasting value? Well, are we doing something good for our neighbors? Are we doing something, and that's back to that, classical music thing. That music is still making plants grow. Whoever wrote it, Beethoven or whoever else they used, from way back when, that stuff has still got lasting health, nutritional value. So is your self-expression self-gratification, or is it actually, and we all live in a world where it's half and half, right? But that's something where it's hard for me to want to be seen in a certain light, and yet does not everything actually that we're seeing is not something coming through us, right? So the prism of the personality and all that sort of thing. What is it Stebbins says about that art is something rather but it's nature seen through the prism of a personality, right? So that's self-expression. What is the self, and then what kind of expression? And then what is meant by interpretation? This is the artist's interpretation of nature. Gamble said that about the Boston School guys, or about the Impressionists in general, that they were interpreting nature, and their music was made out of an interpretation of nature. What did he mean by that? What does it mean in that sense? And Degas used the word interpretation. He said drawing is the interpretation of form. Well, that sounds actually rather more objective, doesn't it? And in both cases, it actually means that in one sense. But does it mean more, right? What is that interpretation thing, right? These are things you need to understand to help you move to the right place, to the ultimate end of what pictures are for, or I'm sorry, not of what pictures are for, but of why you're doing what you're doing, so you can do them better, right? I didn't express that well at all. Okay. So painting is a visual art form, right? Does it share anything in common with music, which is an auditory form? That one is a really, really pleasing question. I do mean to get somebody on one of these videos and talk literally, compare notes with a musician, and I may try it with one of you guys who's talking to me. So I'm not sure it'll work because I don't know you, but fascinating question. And the question is too, does it have value? to make these kinds of cross comparisons. I do it all the time. I can't. I have to watch golf. I have to not watch it, but watch. Well, yeah, even watch it, but read about it. Other crafts. I look at them, and I find these cross relationships. It's the human mind. The stuff that appeals to the human mind, that comes out of the human mind, the workings of the human mind. Um, so that's a good question. I mean, the word notes are in music and in painting. Color is in music and painting. Form is in both, and I don't know to what degree it's uh, in poetry or dance or other forms. Uh, but what does it share in common, and how valuable is that for you to know that, right? I suggest to you that we're heading for a place as we evolve, as we personally evolve. We're heading for a place where we're going to respect that more and more, wonder about that more and more, need that more and more. Um, what can painting do that makes it unique among the arts? I've asked that in a previous way, but this is more specific. What can painting do uniquely that none of the arts can do? I think it's rather important because it's really, like the movies, they have the eyeball stuff. Camp photographs have something. But what does painting have? Why? What does painting have that you should do? Because this is uniquely who we are, and that you should really get yourself to be good at. That's the way I put it to myself. Here's another one that's, by the way, related to beauty, you might say, or some other things, or the it, right? Is there a golden thread? I used to focus on this, right? When I'd look at pictures, I'd be looking for that thing I've referred to already as it. I'd be looking for that thing, and would say, is that part of this great continuum, this great thing that makes up this world that we call aesthetic? I would never be looking at it, taking a work that's not very good and finding it in that. I'd be just simply looking at the guys who brought it, who really brought it, I guess is the best way to say it, right? So, is there a golden thread running throughout great art? Golden thread's a funny word. I can't decide whether it's a scarlet thread, a golden thread, although I do talk, whenever I'm talking about painting, I talk about mining the gold. You're just trying to, what you're going to, not about painting, but about studying, finding the writings, which I hope to bring you in another one of these things soon, which I hope you won't drive you just completely crazy. If any listeners still out there, I'm amazed. So is there a golden thread, possibly in concert with all the other arts? And can you actually describe it? Or will you always be able to say, yeah, that's part of it? Because that will help you to become part of it, right? If it matters to you. And does it matter? Because if there's a pure line, a lineage, a great lineage, then you're going to be either in it or out of it, depending on largely whether you even know what it is, right? So is there such a thing? So, and is it the same quality no matter what culture you're in? That'll help you to even understand the idea of the it. Just look at everything. Persian art. Look at art that isn't pictorial. Look through all arts that way. Look through all of cultures though, and look at Thailand. And look at look at anything from the early art. What was I looking at? Etruscan art really recently. I was surprised that I hadn't recognized what this was. There's some really amazing beauty in it. The Persian art that I was talking about, the Ang used some of that actual Persian idealization, Persian-like figures in his own paintings. The odalisque, one of the particular odalisque paintings. But is that element, is there a unity, is there a thing that they all have? I know I'm just being self-evident to a lot of you people, and I'm hoping all of you. So, and because of that, because it probably should, all these things aren't really self-evident, but still they don't not matter. It matters that you let them sit on your mind, which is probably what you do. Every minute you're working on your craft and help you formulate what you should work on, what you should do well, and if you want to put it that way, control your own evolution. Anyway, but that's just giving you a vision. Trying to everybody needs a vision, but you don't want to turn it into this thing where you're so, as my mom would put it, you're so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good, right? You're so visionary that you can't make a mark on a piece of paper, So, well, anyway, thank you. I'm sure I bored you to death. So, and we'll see you in the next one. Don't forget, to subscribe, share, and comment. And correct me as much as you like, guys. I don't stand corrected, by the way, that when I was addressing a different point. But anyway, all right. So take care now.